For more on this and the global economy, we bring in Mr. William Lee, Chief Economist at the Milken Institute. Good to see you again live from LA. Hey, we got to stop doing this. We got to have you back when there's some good news, okay? But today we don't have that. We have these awful inflation numbers. Give us your take and your reaction to them.
Well, inflation is certainly running incredibly hot. We had some economists and policymakers have been hoping to find some sign that inflation was nearing a top and that some prices would start to moderate. Well, very few of those signs right now. Everything that was important to the man in the street, gasoline, food, housing, all of those continue to accelerate, and it looks like inflation's got a head of steam under it, and the Fed has got a job to do to try to equilibrate supply and demand, because right now, demand way outstrips supply.
Right. The last 2 weeks, I've been listening to economists and macroeconomists and experts, if you will, saying we've hit the peak or we're near the peak, and quite frankly, with today's numbers, they're all wrong, which means that the Federal Reserve might have to be more aggressive. And I've been arguing with myself whether it's good news or bad news, but 50 basis points is baked in. I don't know, some people are saying 75 basis points. I mean, do we need to panic?
Well, the Fed has got to establish that its credibility as an inflation fighter. Back in March, when the FOMC notes were released, they showed a forecast that showed what I've been calling immaculate disinflation. Inflation coming down without any rise in the unemployment rate, without any slowdown in growth. And that was just not credible at all. And people started questioning, are these guys serious about inflation? That's why you've seen all this hawkish talk. As inflation continued to power up, the Fed has got to be more and more convincing that it's serious about getting inflation down. And that's why all this talk about raising interest rates at 75, maybe even 100 basis points.
We had a chat among the staff earlier, and we talked about why do we care about inflation, right? And ultimately it comes down to spending power. If I make $10 and I spend $5, you know, and so on. But now if I have to spend $6 or $7, and you take oil prices as an example, that has a psychological impact on people's spending habits. Are we seeing evidence of demand destruction yet?
We don't see enough of it, otherwise inflation would have moderated. And that's really the key crisis that the Fed is facing. If it really tries to moderate demand to the point where they destroy enough demand to moderate inflation, are you going to start to see layoffs? Are you going to start to see unemployed? And then you're going to have a different kind of social problem, because this is a generation of people who have never had a situation where we've run into a real serious recession, right, along with high inflation.
I'm just, a silly question, who do we blame for this inflation? Like, everybody wants to say, well, whose fault is it? I mean, things are good, that's why things cost more, but I think it's more complicated than that.
It's a rich man's problem, in the sense that people have way too much money to spend on very few goods. Because of the global supply chains being so broken, the amount of money that people have to spend would not cause any inflation at all if the supply chains were in place. But because of the difficulties and also with the war raising the price of energy, where the common people are just facing a situation where the necessities of life are just getting more and more costly, and it's causing them to shift their spending from vacations to buying bread, eggs, and putting gasoline in the tank.
Right. And oftentimes we have these conversations, and it's very much in the weeds, right? But for the average normal people, like I'm guessing your friends and my friends, what are we supposed to do about this on a day-to-day basis? Do we just go on living our lives? Do we eat out less? Do we fly less? Do we cut off that? What are we supposed to do to manage this?
You hit it right on the head. Inflation is something where we can't, as individuals, do anything about, but we can certainly get inflation controlled if we were to switch away from the things that are in demand. Everybody wants to take a vacation. So guess what? The supply of airplane seats is very limited, and the price of airplane seats is going through the roof. So if we just decide to say, let's delay our vacation and let's take it in the fall or next year, that would do a lot to alleviate inflation. And decisions like that. But you can't say, I'm not going to use gasoline, I'm not going to go to work, I'm not going to buy dinner for my kids. That's really the hard choice.
Right. I got to ask you this before we let you go. You know, we got a Fed decision coming up. We got kind of a blah summer coming up. You still have the situation in Ukraine. You have supply chain issues. We won't go into all that. What is your forecast and expectation for the next 60 days going forward? Are things going to get better, or are they going to get worse?
The Fed has promised us that they will be doing 50 basis points on next meeting, and they'll stick to it. But they're going to hint around like we may have to press on even further with higher interest rate increases if the numbers deteriorate. I'm expecting inflation to continue the huge momentum it's got right now. It's going to take a while before we start to see inflation turn the corner.
William, I really would say this, but I really hope you're wrong. And
so do I.
Have a great weekend. I'm nervous about next week. All right, have a great weekend. Always good to see William Lee from the Milken Institute.